Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. As most of you probably know, I started this series of videos to expose the lie that Elliot Rodger was connected to the men's rights movement. But I am now expanding it to cover any falsehoods, misconceptions, misinformation, or outright lies spread about the MRM. So let's get stuck into it. Let's start with a hit piece from the Telegraph. It's titled, "Men's Rights Activists Have Missed the Point of Feminism Entirely." Online forums that claim men are demonized by feminism only serve to propagate a lamentable and dangerous form of misogyny, writes Andrew Lowry. And of course, the article shows a picture of Elliot Rodger. So we haven't even got past the title, and already we have another example of Bane's Law. But let's continue, because Andrew Lowry is about to show us how men are demonized, by actively demonizing men in his article. Next. Last week, 18-year-old Ben Moynihan was found guilty of attempting to stab 3 women to death in Portsmouth over the summer of 2014. During the spree, Moynihan taunted police with a series of bizarre notes that blamed his actions on his inability to lose his virginity. Women were fussy, he said, adding that he'd grown up to believe them as a more weaker part of the human breed. Just in case you were about to mistake him for a misunderstood romantic, he helpfully added, "All women need to die and hopefully next time I can gouge their eyes out." We've been here before. Just last year, the similarly virginal Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and himself after uploading to the internet a rambling manifesto detailing the various slights he'd undergone at the hands of women. In 2009, George Sodini killed 3 women and himself at a Pittsburgh gym, having given his motive as not having had sex since 1990. There have been others. So what do all these men have in common? You guessed it, none of them had anything to do with the men's rights movement. But I'm guessing the author is about to tell us otherwise. Next. These killings have coincided with the rise in online campaigning on behalf of men's rights, the ironic-ish feminism movement, in a wider sense that men, young men in particular, are leading a backlash against feminism. They argue that the movement to promote women's place in society has resulted in the demonization of all men as sexist pigs at best, incipient rapists at worst. To which you have to ask, what world are these people living in? Oh, the irony. So he starts his article by talking about evil men killing women, to create an image in the minds of his readers, a misogynistic stereotype, which he now will attempt to attach to any and all males that do not meet his social justice standards. And ironically, he doesn't see this as demonization. Which I guess is understandable, as his worldview only allows him to see men in a negative light. So I guess to him, through his eyes, the distorted image that he sees appears as truth, and not demonization. Or he could just be a bad liar. As for the killings coinciding with the rise of men's rights, I find this a stretch, even for this level of journalism. I guess he has never heard of, correlation does not imply causation. Not that there is even correlation between the men's rights movement, and these men. You'll note, he doesn't present any evidence, he doesn't show a connection, not even the implied connection we have seen from other journalistic hacks. Oh no, he just says, these things have coincided. It's like saying that Joanne Dennehy murdering 3 men, and attempting to kill others, coincided with the hashtag, #KillAllMen. Therefore all feminists, everywhere, are guilty of murder. Even though there is no connection between Joanne Dennehy and feminism. Obviously this would be a moronic argument. Yet this is the level of journalism we are subjected to. It seems that Andrew Lowry is unaware of murder happening prior to men's rights groups appearing on the internet. Next. Trying to argue that men have become a class of disfranchised nobodies is like trying to argue the sky is red because you don't like the color blue. Huffing and puffing about humorless harridans who are trying to deny the lads their banter doesn't change any of the systemic realities in our society. And turning the progress women have made into an excuse for quasi-politicized self-pity is just pathetic. No, actually what is pathetic, is turning a blind eye to actual issues based on someone's gender. This, only women are allowed to have real issues bullshit, gets really tiring. But let's have a look at his use of language. Instead of saying men have issues, we get, men have become a class of disfranchised nobodies. He's implying that men have never really had issues, ever. So homelessness, or suicide, have never been issues for men, just name two. And of course he has to use the term, nobodies, because his entire case rests on lies, propaganda and ad homs. So he once again has to reinforce the idea in the reader's mind, that these men's rights guys are just nobodies. He of course follows this up with talk of, denying the lads their banter, because that's all men's rights is, right? A bunch of whiny spoiled kids who are crying over not getting their way. Of course, all this bullshit is devoid of any real arguments, not to mention journalism. Next. Let's take a look at some of the key points men's rights activists, MRAs, make. These include how it's overwhelmingly men who are sent off to fight in wars, men who die younger, men who fill our prisons, men who are denied custody of children in divorce settlements, and, increasingly, men who earn less than the women who leech off their God-given rights as overlords of all they survey. You don't need to be Andrea Dworkin to assert that war-making and violent crime both tally more with a testosterone-dominated body than one fed with estrogen. The list of wars started by women is a very, very short one, unless Helen of Troy is more offensive to modern online commenters than you may realize. Knowing these people, she probably is. Oh. So it's testosterone which is the culprit. Not states competing for limited resources, or conflict between ideologies or religions? Oh no, nothing as complex as that. Nothing to do with human societies being complex mechanisms. Oh no, it's much easier to just conclude that males have evil juice, known as testosterone, in their very blood. No. There's nothing demonizing males in that belief, clearly not. Next. Regarding divorce, reliable stats are tricky to pin down. Women certainly win more custody battles than men, though whether their hit rate is as high as 93%, as has been suggested in the press before, seems dubious. It's a stretch to imagine that the male-dominated judiciary is embarked on a campaign to deny their gender brethren access to their children. Oh, of course. Because males only ever side with other males, right? I mean, you'd never get a male siding with a woman. If he did, he'd have his patriarchy party membership revoked, and would no longer be able to use the special patriarchy gold-plated toilets. You know, the ones with the toilet paper made out of kittens. This guy, for example, was once a CEO billionaire with 50 gold-plated yachts, but one day he sided with a woman and lost his membership in the patriarchy. But seriously. The author of this article is fucking blind to gynocentrism. He's blind to the benefits given to women by the system, just for being women. And the idiot has clearly never heard of the sentencing gap. If his theory is correct, and the judicial system is, supposedly, dominated by males who, supposedly, look out for the best interest of other males, then why do males get longer sentences, for the exact same crimes committed by women? Next. Most importantly, the old chestnut of the pay gap, one of the central targets of feminism, still persists. Sure, in 2012 the Office for National Statistics found that women aged 22 to 29 in full-time employment earned a colossal 2.9% more than their male counterparts, but that's a sledgehammer applied to a delicate issue. For one, the figure fails to account for the fact that many more women than men are in part-time employment. It fades even more when you factor in the ongoing disparity in lifetime earnings, or in compensation packages in the professions. Women earn on average £8,000 less than a man in law, £14,000 less as a chief executive and £9,000 less as a doctor. Is it just me, or is this guy clueless about where babies come from? Because if you add women taking time off work, or shifting to part-time work, due to children, to the equation, that one missing puzzle piece explains why there is a gap in his examples. Obviously, someone who works less number of years, is going to earn less money. Next. These are all political and economic realities. Areas where the arguments of MRAs can be refuted with hard facts. It's when they move on to the topic of sexual consent, however, that you know you're wasting your effort fighting people who are beyond reason. Refuted with hard facts? You have got to be fucking kidding, right? What facts has he presented? Wow, this guy is an A-grade moron. Next. There is nothing more insidious and pernicious than the way factions of MRAs approach the hows and whys of getting laid. Take a look at the Red Pill subreddit or the forums on avoiceformen.com as examples. You'll encounter high horse self-righteousness over the vanishingly small number of false rape allegations made by women against men, set to a backdrop of nervy whining by men who claim they are unable to approach women for fear of being accused. As I have discussed the topic of false rape claims extensively in recent videos, I'm not going to repeat myself yet again, and instead move on. Feel free to check out my recent work. Next. In these dank corners of the internet, a whole language has developed for beta males to bemoan their involuntary celibacy, and discuss techniques used by pickup artists, remember Julian Blank? To attract the opposite sex. Women become reduced to tokens of victory in a struggle for dominance, and yet are held up as oppressive shriekers perpetually ready to send a lad to the stocks for something he didn't do. So here we have the tactic we have now seen repeated ad infinitum. The feminist or social justice douchebag tries to reduce their opponent to a stereotype, a straw man, of a desperate loser who wants desperately to be with a woman, but is just too much of a loser, so he turns his anger outward, towards innocent women, who have never ever said or done a thing wrong, because, vagina. These scumbags use this tactic, because they have no real arguments. They are not interested in discussion, or debate. They are not interested in being fair. The only trick they have is propaganda. And it's pathetic. Next. Resentment and confusion reign, resentment at women having, their own agency. And confusion that they have, the right to choose their sexual partners. Hence troubled young men who struggle to find partners, like Moynihan and Roger, begin to blame women for their problems, not the wider culture at hand. And nothing he just said has anything to do with men's rights. Not a thing. Next. Feminism is not a zero-sum game, where every breakthrough for women means a loss for men. The sooner angry young men realize that, the better off we will all be. So once again we have a stereotype. The angry young man. Inexperienced and naive, not to mention clearly dangerous, right? Not once does he ever listen to why we are angry. Not once does he ever consider we might be angry for a reason. He just dismisses us as pathetic and beneath him. Which is reason enough to be angry, if you ask me. Next.
I don't really think that there's any easy way of saying this, but essentially, I think that there is a very, very big cultural war coming soon.
Actually, I think it's already here.
And that cultural war is going to be between people who are on the right side of history and who think that men and women deserve equality, and those people who do not.
And by those people who do not, I'm guessing you are talking about feminists?
I am, of course, talking about men's rights activists. I remember hearing as a child that a tiger is at its most dangerous when it's cornered and when it's old.
Not to mention, when it's been playing violent video games.
Basically when it knows its end is about to come. And that, to me, is patriarchy in a nutshell. People see it for what it is. People see the damage it does to both men and women. And they see that it's a poisonous system that is really not tenable in the modern world anymore.
I think you mean feminism.
But the pushback is rather loud, rather dangerous, and rather frightening. To the howling masses of sub-threads on Reddit, all the way up to people dropping docs in the Gamergate controversy.
As always, this is only half the story. Here is the other half. There are arseholes on both sides of the debate. Yet this guy is willing to judge all gamergators and MRAs based on the actions of the few, while ignoring the same behavior from feminists and social justice warriors. That would mean he's either incredibly ignorant, or just a hypocrite. Next.
All the way up to people sending rape and death threats. And
you mean like the ones that Lacey Green got a couple of years back? Oh. But hold on, those threats were made by social justice warriors. And then there is this. Clearly this is an example of an evil male MRA, threatening a helpless female feminist, right? Actually, it's an example of a male feminist threatening a female MRA. And for the record, helpless isn't really a word I'd use to describe Karen. To their credit, some of Bewildered Ape's former cronies did call him out on his behavior. Although it does beg the question, would they have done the same if his threats were towards a male MRA? I suspect not. And in case you missed it, this is the same Bewildered Ape that has targeted Thunderfoot's employer, in an attempt to get Thunderfoot fired. But clearly discussing any of this would destroy the false narrative of, MRA's bad, feminists good. Only presenting one side's dirty laundry is just a propaganda trick. It's really no different than falsely associating the men's rights movement with Elliot Rodger.
All the way up to people like Elliot Rodger actually going out and killing people because of perceived injustices he saw against men. When a privileged group sees that its influence and that its privilege is beginning to slip away, it fights back, and it fights back in any way it can.
And here is the perfect example of why feminism is not interested in equality. They see all men as privileged. They judge all men, based on those very few at the top, while ignoring those men at the bottom of the system, who are the ones supporting the whole thing. Feminists see all men as privileged, because they are blind towards those men who are not. This is not equality, it's hypergamy. Next.
Now, thankfully in this particular case, a lot of the ways that the privileged class is trying to fight back presents itself in completely ridiculous ways. One need only listen to the howling misogyny of places like A Voice for Men as confirmation of this.
Yet he gives no examples.
Or, in my own country, the party which has decided that it is going to go up in the general election. The party which runs on a purely anti-feminist platform, the Justice for Men and Boys Party.
Actually, it's not just anti-feminist at all. Its purpose is to get recognition and help for male issues. Unless this guy thinks helping men is anti-feminist? Next.
Now, both of these examples are extremely laughable, but they shouldn't just be brushed off or ignored. These ideas can gain traction. And the reason we shouldn't just brush off and laugh away these examples is because there are very real injustices against men. And things like A Voice for Men and things like the men's rights activist movement rely on the fact that men do feel disenfranchised, they do feel ignored, and they do feel very real injustices against them. The one thing that they won't ever tell these disenfranchised, disillusioned men, though, is that the reason they feel this way is because of the power system that they find themselves living in, namely the patriarchy. I mean, pardon me, but it isn't the men's rights movement that's tackling the societal idea that raising children is women's work, and that's why women are overwhelmingly found in favor of when it comes to custody hearings.
I've covered this bullshit so many times now. Of course he totally ignores the National Organization for Women's stance of mothers getting custody. This feminism stuff is confusing, you know. When women want custody, and get custody, it's because of patriarchy. Yet, when men want custody, that's also patriarchy. Patriarchy everywhere, it seems. It's kind of like the Illuminati for feminists. Next.
It isn't the men's rights movement tackling the societal idea that men should never ever show weakness, that they should never ever ask for help. And that's why we overwhelmingly suffer from higher levels of mental illness, or why it's overwhelmingly so that men, young men, are the ones that commit suicide.
So just last week, in Mother Jones, there was an article published called, "Mad Men, Inside the Men's Rights Movement, and the Army of Misogynists and Trolls It Spawned. How did an ex-feminist once hailed by Gloria Steinem become a hero of the haters?" As the title might suggest, it's a hit piece, a very very long, hit piece. And although it does the typical bullshit like constantly mentioning the name, Elliot Rodger, it does have some interesting parts as well. You see, the author of this article was invited to the first International Men's Rights Conference last year. And she sat in on Warren Farrell's workshop. And here is what she had to say. A soft-spoken septuagenarian with a silver beard and delicate hands, Farrell explained with a smile why he'd asked the security team to stand down. "I said it didn't look like there were any killers out there." There was a burst of laughter. After a while, he asked everyone to stand up. "Put anything you have in your hands down and just give that person in front of you a nice shoulder rub," he said. Tension faded from the men's faces. Over the next several hours, Farrell doled out hugs, regaled them with stories about his days as a feminist icon, and waxed lyrical about fatherhood and male sacrifice. He also invited the men to share their personal pain. Some wept as they spoke. And a bit later on, during Farrell's private workshop in Detroit, he focused on male sacrifice. "What I'm going to ask you to do is just close your eyes with me for a moment. I'm going to ask you to find a time in your father's life when your father had what you would say is a glint in his eye." As the men bowed their heads, he told a story about a man who went home after one of his workshops and spoke to his father. He said, "Dad, I realized that I had thought a lot about me but not a lot about you. I didn't ask you about what your sacrifices were and what really made you happy." And his dad's response was to cry for the first time that he had ever seen his father cry. When the men lifted their heads, their faces were flush with emotion. Farrell went around the room asking them to share their stories. Tom, a portly, gray-haired man with Coke bottle glasses, described how his father, a textile worker, had struggled for 20 years before stumbling into a college teaching job and finding a modicum of fulfillment. "I didn't really realize how much of a glint in his eye it was until he passed away," Tom said. "Unfortunately, he didn't stick around very much to enjoy it." Next up was Brian, a lanky, bearded 30-year-old barge hand who had driven up from Tennessee for the event. After his parents' divorce, he only saw his father, a power line technician who was a workaholic, once or twice a year. "The joy in him was buried so deep that it took me a minute to get clarity on where the glint came from," Brian explained as he broke down crying. "It came from me, when he'd see me step off the plane." As Brian spoke, Farrell wrapped an arm around his shoulder. Some of the other men wiped away tears or buried their heads in their hands. Later Matt, a clean-cut young man in a polo shirt and khaki shorts, recalled how his father spent decades working a job he hated at the IRS. Only last December, after his father passed away, did Matt realize that his father had harbored a secret passion for writing. "Basically he drank himself to death. And when my siblings and I were cleaning out his apartment we found a lot of empty liquor bottles, but also a lot of unpublished poetry and scripts," he said, looking down. "Also, I found his application to the federal government, which was from 1971, about the same month my older brother was conceived. So things sort of fell into place for me." Farrell had repeatedly asked me to serve as a stand-in for women. I was the only one present, and at the end of the exercise he called me to the front of the room and asked me to interview some of the men so that they could practice discussing their concerns. First up was Jim, a slender, amiable ex-professor with freckles and curly red hair. When I asked how he became interested in men's rights, he faced the group and flashed a sly smile. "Well, my ex-wife had a lot to do with that," he said. "She had me arrested for the crime of domestic violence. I went to trial because I was innocent, and I spent 6 months in a box with other angry men. I lost my job and my career." Make good eye contact, Farrell prodded. Connect from the heart, so you can keep track of where you're connecting with her and where you're disconnecting. Jim spun around, looked at me intently, and further explained that the episode had sparked his interest in general biases against men in society. "So what was it again?" our feminist friend said.
It isn't the men's rights movement tackling the societal idea that men should never ever show weakness, that they should never ever ask for help.
And, of course, he couldn't be more wrong. But I'm guessing he's never seen us tackle it, because he's never bothered to look. And let's remember that the conference, where Warren Farrell ran his workshop, was threatened with feminist protests and death threats. But I also have a personal experience to add here. As most of you probably know, in September last year, I attended a local men's rights meeting in my hometown of Melbourne. Some of the other attendees talked openly about some serious issues, in what should have been a safe space for them to do so. But as it turned out, we had been infiltrated by a journalist who wrote. Then, it took the feel of an AA meeting like any you've seen in a Hollywood film. People went around in a circle introducing themselves, how they came to the movement and their place within it. This is where things got unsettling. It became immediately clear the vast majority of these men were deeply wounded. There were stories of schizophrenic mothers, abusive wives, lost or estranged children. It's hard not to imagine their point of view as a way of dealing with this trauma. It's, perhaps, easier to rail against institutions they feel prosecute and punish their shared manhood than deal with the idea that they suffered an injustice, but that injustice may have been meted out capriciously or through the failure of individuals rather than large-scale systems. I, last man to speak, mumbled something about feminism going too far and being just there to learn, which seemed to suffice. I can tell you firsthand, this is bullshit. Yes, there were some very serious stories told, which is proof that men have issues also. But once again we have a feminist perspective that tries to excuse away men's issues, as something whiny broken men complain about. Personally, I didn't find anything unsettling, nor did I view anyone who shared very personal, and very real experiences, as deeply wounded. I did however listen to them, feel compassion, and respect their strength. Next.
I don't see the men's rights movement doing anything about prison rape, or in fact rape in general, apart from push the ludicrous idea that men are raped by women far more than women are raped by men.
To put it bluntly, we have reached the point where all rape statistics are fucked. And it's impossible to put any trust in any of them. We constantly hear from feminists that 1 in 5 women will be raped, or 1 in 4, or even 1 in 3. All of which have been debunked. We also hear from some feminists that if a woman has had any amount of alcohol to drink, then she gives up any and all agency. Yet the same, strangely, does not apply to males, who it seems maintain agency and responsibility regardless of intoxication. Prison rape and sexual assault, affecting mainly males, is ignored for the most part by society, and usually when it does come up, it's in the form of a joke. And a male being forced to penetrate a female, in many areas of the world, isn't even considered rape. This is all due to 40 years of feminist rape hysteria. I think it's time we allowed a different perspective. Next.
And I'm terribly sorry, guys, but by every conceivable metric and by every conceivable study done, the numbers don't support you on this. You're just wrong. And similarly with domestic violence. Instead of actually tackling the problem, the only thing you do, which is extremely unhelpful, is to claim that men suffer at the hands of women in terms of domestic violence far more than the other way around. And
actually, we just point out the number of studies that claim that males and females have roughly equal percentages of perpetration and victimhood. Equality means recognizing both perpetrators and victims regardless of gender. Feminism does not do this. It's only interested in male victimizers and female victims. Which is just one of many reasons why feminism isn't about equality. Next.
Again, by every conceivable metric, by every conceivable study, the numbers don't support you. You're wrong on this. The only thing that I've seen the men's rights movement do is set itself in direct opposition to feminism. Rather than actually stepping up to the plate and being a movement that could actually help men, the men's rights movement shows itself to be nothing more than a childish, reactionary movement comprised of thoroughly unpleasant individuals who are just pissed off with the fact that women can own land and vote now.
My head I'd be scratching while my thoughts were busy hatching if I only had a brain.
And I have no qualms whatsoever in saying that the men's rights movement betrays the very charges that they claim to help. Now, is all my saying this a claim that feminism is perfect? By no means. Feminism has had and will continue to have its problems. It's only to be expected from a movement that's that large and that has that great a diversity of viewpoints.
So his position is: A. Feminism isn't perfect and has faults. But B. Attempting to criticize any of these faults automatically makes you a woman-hating misogynist. I would think that if there is any belief system, method, ideology or person who happens to be imperfect and have faults, then that belief system, method, ideology, or person should be open to fair criticism. It also stands to reason that not all criticism is fair or just. But feminists try to shut down debate with shaming language, silencing tactics, propaganda and lies. I'm here for a discussion. I'm not afraid to have my ideas challenged. The same can't be said for feminists. Next.
But it demonstrably has a very good track record of giving a shit and wanting to change things for the better.
Pushy. Stubborn. Pushy. Stubborn. Bossy.
I shouldn't need a penis to get paid.
But that more than can be said for a movement that at best wants to re-elevate men to the status of giants by making women small again.
Actually, we would just like some recognition of our issues, but fucking arseholes like this guy keep standing in our way. And this is meant to be equality? Next.
So yes, I do believe that there's a war coming. And I've picked a side, and I think it's the side that will be remembered kindest by history. And it's the only side that I think I could have picked as dictated by my conscience. So for me at least, feminism isn't just a label. It's a way of thinking. And it's a prism through which I view the rest of the world.
Did he just say prism or prison? Because it sounded like prism, but prison would make more sense.
Until the next time I clock 1,000 heads, and until the next time we unite through common dreads.
Dear MRAs.
Geez. Sale Polani has really let herself go. But please continue, Sale.
You cannot promote something and then complain about the thing that you're promoting and hold any validity.
That's a very good point. Let's hope he has lots of examples. That's not really Sale Polani, by the way. Her shoulders are much hairier.
You cannot promote the idea of guys being the breadwinners and guys being badasses while complaining about it at the same time.
And this would be where he gives examples, right?
You can't complain about having to buy women things and then promote the idea of being the protectors.
And which MRAs are doing this? I cannot think of any. Any examples?
At the same time and hold any validity. If you want to be a walking oxymoron, Go ahead and keep promoting this stuff while complaining about the very same things that caused this to be the case in the first place.
And once again I have to ask, who is doing this?
Don't complain about gender roles and then promote gender roles at the same time. You can't have it both ways.
Then I guess it's fortunate that we aren't doing that.
Either you promote gender roles or you're against gender roles. You can't complain about them and promote them at the same time. This isn't rocket science. Let's be very clear about this. This is not rocket science. This is pretty elementary.
This handsome hunk of braless man meat is Kazum Fowler. And I had a look through his comment section. The loner said, "Are you speaking about any specific people, examples? Or just comments in general?" I asked because I haven't seen anything like this myself. I certainly see people either complaining about or reinforcing traditional gender roles as you describe them. I can't recall seeing anyone I know as an MRA doing both. Kazum replied. It was generic. For instance, someone who looks down on a guy for staying at home in a relationship with a woman while she works, while complaining about guys having to be the ones who are the breadwinners. There are examples of many people with that type of mindset who agreed with the Amazing Atheist's video about #LikeAGirl. And I then jumped in on the conversation with, "And you know these people are MRAs, how exactly?" Kazum replied, "Because they parrot many of the points that MRAs make. You might as well make the same arguments towards those who comment on feminist videos who say misandric things, and say, well, how do you know they're really feminists?" Then I replied, "So in other words, you are talking about anti-feminists, and not MRAs. Although most MRAs are anti-feminist, not all anti-feminists are MRAs. So your argument in this video is built on a false assumption, stereotype." Then Kazum replied, "I knew you'd say some bullshit like that. If I got the names of people, this is exactly how you'd respond. You'd say they're not real MRAs. I would have wasted my time. Don't try to waste my time anymore, thanks. And just a point of note, yes, most, which means a huge percentage, of anti-feminists are MRAs, just as most, to the point of saying virtually all anti-theists are atheists. What's your point? Oh yeah, to dismiss everything I've said here. And also, another point of note, as most anti-theists are atheists, most atheists are not anti-theists. In the case of MRAs, as most anti-feminists are MRAs, most MRAs are anti-feminists." I then replied, regarding, yes, most, which means a huge percentage, of anti-feminists are MRAs. Well, you have either purposely misrepresented what I said here, or have poor reading skills. As I said, although most MRAs are anti-feminist, not all anti-feminists are MRAs. PUAs are anti-feminist, but are not MRAs. Women against feminism are anti-feminist, but are not MRAs. Tradcons are anti-feminist, but are not MRAs. Many gamergaters are anti-feminist, but most gamergaters are not MRAs. MGTOW are anti-feminist, but not all MGTOW are MRAs. Etc. etc. In other words, you've been intellectually lazy, and lumped all anti-feminists together under the banner of MRA, even though most anti-feminists aren't advocating for men's rights. Let me give you a clue. If someone doesn't advocate for the rights of men, then they are not a men's rights advocate, regardless of their opinions on the topic of feminism. Kazum replied, "There are people who call themselves MRAs who still try to cram gender roles down people's throats. They're interested in rights, not in changing social attitudes. Many MRAs are fine with the social attitudes that currently exist. They like and promote the social attitudes because they think the social attitudes are purely based on our biology. You can see this right in comments on this video. They think that if it does have to do with culture in any way, that it's negligible. You are the one who is saying that if someone is an MRA that they must believe in certain things. you stop being intellectually lazy. Stop trying to claim that there aren't any MRAs who believe differently than you simply because it would meant that they believe differently than you. And I replied, regarding, stop trying to claim that there aren't any MRAs who believe differently than you simply because it would meant that they believe differently than you. But I'm not claiming that at all. You are the one who is making the claim about the MRM. Yet the only evidence you present in these comments, not in the video, is hearsay about anti-feminists, with no evidence that these anti-feminists are MRAs. That which can be asserted without evidence, can be dismissed without evidence. Some screen captures in your video would have been an easy way to avoid this, wouldn't it? Regarding, there are people who call themselves MRAs who still try to cram gender roles down people's throats. Name them. Kazum replied. By now. So this is one of those things which I really find annoying. Where people who clearly do not advocate for men's rights are still classed as men's rights advocates, because they sound like some straw man men's rights stereotype. Here's another example. From the Frisky MRA site accidentally publishes John Birch Society tract as #Gamergate Manifesto. An MRA site. I wonder who they are talking about. Probably AVFM, right? Well, no, let's have a look. This past November, Rush V, a men's rights activist, seduction guru and proprietor of the batshit MRA site, Return of Kings, decided to start a new website about video games called Reaction. Not because he is particularly into video games himself, but because he understands the plight of Gamergate dudes who are sad about women and social justice warriors ruining all the video games. Oh. Return of the Kings is now advocating for the rights of men, and here I thought they were just a pickup artist site. You'll remember last episode in this series, that this guy claimed that Warcorp 666 was an MRA. Fuck. It's almost like everyone who isn't a feminist is an MRA. And sometimes, even anti-MRA feminists get labeled as MRAs.
Hello YouTube. Just a brief little rant. For those of you that are uncertain, I am not an MRA. My channel is called MRAs Exposed. I thought this might be a hint to some people, but I guess a few of us are a little bit slow on the uptake. So for those of us that struggle with this, no, I am not an MRA. Take a hint, look at the channel name, and maybe bother to look at what I'm favoriting, what I'm featuring, what groups I'm in, the sorts of things that I'm saying, what playlists I have, instead of just assuming that I'm an MRA. And why did you assume that I'm an MRA, you banal little twat? Oh yes, that's right, because you came to me as a result of someone called David Futrell, who put out a nice little video about MRAs in his comments section. Now, for some reason, some of Dear David's subscribers are a little bit narrow-minded, and they're not able to really reason for themselves. So when David says on his blog that he's got people, MRAs on his videos, naturally, his followers come to me, MRAs Exposed, the one person with the channel name that clearly indicates he's not an MRA, and they go, "You MRA douchebag, I'm gonna get you." Yes, if the conspirators at Man Boobs could please do better, I'd be ever so grateful. Thank you. Love to everyone, especially you for this, David. It's always nice to have idiots come my way so that I can give them a good spanking now and then. Anyhow, sorry about the rants. Bye, YouTube. Take care.
If you are wondering who the guy in the clip is, his name is MRAs Exposed. Oh, hold on, isn't it? Cases and materials. No, come to think of it, I think it's Wonkiest Joker 69. Oh, hold on a second, I think it's Is No God 20, or it might be Is No God 16, or maybe it's Is No God 13. This detestable little feminist halfwit has had more YouTube sock accounts than I've had socks. And even he, who does nothing but anti-MRA rants, has been accused of being an MRA by the moronic minions of Dave, Man-Boobs, Futrell. Fucking crazy. So let's just deal with this shit once and for all, shall we? Anti-feminist is a blanket term which covers many different groups. You have men's rights activists. You have MGTOW. You have the pickup artists. You have traditional conservatives. You have gamergaters. You have women against feminism. You have various types of religious fundamentalists. And you have individuals who don't fit in any of those groups. Being an anti-feminist, and being in one of the above groups, does not mean you are in all the groups, nor does it mean you have anything in common with any other group, apart from rejecting the ideology of feminism. Let me give you an analogy. I think it would be safe to say that the vast majority, if not all, feminists would be anti-Nazi. I also think it would be fair to say that the vast majority, if not all, MRAs would be anti-Nazi. Therefore both feminists and MRAs agree that Nazi ideology is wrong. Does this agreement on one thing then logically mean that feminists and MRAs are exactly the same group? After all, when it comes to the topic of anti-Nazism, they sound exactly alike. Of course it doesn't mean they are the same group. Just because they agree on one thing, doesn't mean they agree on everything else. I'm sure that both the Westboro Baptist Church and the Taliban both agree that atheists like myself are going to hell. But that doesn't mean the two groups are going to do brunch anytime soon. The one thing that all anti-feminist groups have in common is the fact that they disagree with feminist ideology. In fact, it could even be argued that these various groups might not even agree on what feminist ideology they don't like. So let's simplify this, shall we? Being an anti-feminist does not make you an MRA, it makes you an anti-feminist. To be an MRA, you actually have to spread awareness, or do real-life activism, about the issues of men. If you are not advocating for the rights of men, then you are not a men's rights advocate. Disliking feminism isn't enough. If you think I'm wrong, then please explain below. And I should also point out that, not everyone from those groups I listed earlier are necessarily anti-feminist. For example, being a gamergater, or an MRA, or MGTOW, doesn't require that you also be an anti-feminist. But of course, feminists and social justice crusaders will continue to use the straw fedora trope, either through laziness, ignorance, or sheer dishonesty. Next.
Hi YouTube, it's Laughing Witch. I'm going to do a video. This video is going to be titled, I'm the leader of the social justice warriors now.
As this is a long rambling video, I'm going to jump ahead to the part where she starts to talk about the men's rights movement. I'm probably going to include the earlier parts in an upcoming episode of The Gender Dilemma. Probably episode 4 or 5, depending on how what I'm presently working on pans out. As always, the link to Laughing Witch's complete video is below.
Now I want to talk about Bewildered Ape and Karen Strawn, or Girl Writes What. When I first heard about what had happened, I was a little upset, and I thought, well, all you have to do is piss a man off and he's going to go all full, misogynist. But then, when I kind of saw everything in context, I kind of understood that he just got kind of dragged into a conversation, and he did not really understand the kind of person he was dealing with. And I think that, everybody's saying it's satire now because they want to think they got it, but I don't think he planned that. I think he got sucked into it. And he asked me if I thought she felt threatened, and I told him that I thought she was too busy proving that she's a real man. And I think this, when I look at her, I see somebody who is a transgender who isn't smart enough to realize it. She has a lot of swagger and a lot of male arrogance and a lot of, I've got a real package between my legs kind of an attitude.
So much for feminists doing away with gender roles.
And if you find that offensive, I'm sorry, but that's just how I see her. that particular person. You know, not just because she's a men's rights activist. I mean, she claims she's a feminist, and she doesn't think women should lose the right to vote. Or
Karen Strawn is a feminist?
the right to go to school or anything. So if she says she's a feminist, I'm cool with that. But I just see her...
Fuck. Next they'll be claiming Elliot Rodger was an MRA.
...her as needing to be a man. And she doesn't really get in touch with it like that. Okay, so my whole point is we can't blame Noel Plum for anything. It's time for us to say, well, it's happening on our watch. This is our history right now. There is a cultural war jumping off. And, you know, we have to play our part in it. We just can't sit on YouTube and say, oh, we're surrounded by haters, but it doesn't matter. We can do something about it. We can clean up YouTube just like Stop Rush, okay, is killing him. We can do that. If they can do that with someone as big as Rush Limbaugh, Thunder Dunder stands no chance at all. So I sent my letter, and as the leader of the social justice warriors, I'm calling out everybody to do the same.
And an insane zealot is the perfect person to represent the social justice warriors.
I would like some of you bigger names to do a video where you actually say, let's do it. But if you don't, that's okay. If you think I'm wrong, that's okay. There is no totalitarian free speech. Rush Limbaugh, and I'm going to go back to where the guy says, the painful lesson for Limbaugh and the right-wing talkers is a simple one. You can say whatever you want, but you don't have the right to be paid for it. Now that advertisers are fleeing the entire hate radio format, station owners are considering their options and retooling for the digital age. This will be linked in the low bar. Why can't we do that? He needs to decide whether he believes in Nazism, and he's a fascist who wants to kill Jews, and Muslims, and feminists, and he wants to wield an army of Nazi, fascist-leaning, you know, terrorists. Or if he wants to be a scientist. I think you should have to choose. And that's really all I have to say, except I am going to link an article also which talks about the toxic environment that's created when people make misogynistic remarks. I'm going to link that for Bewildered Ape. I hope he will watch this video and read the article. I don't blame him for basically throwing her own followers' words in her face. But the point being is it did create a hostile environment. And Grave Crow quit YouTube and closed his channel down. And I don't know if Grave Crow was a male or a female because it's hard to gender a crow.
That is true.
But I don't know if it was rage quitting or hurt quitting. Grave Crow is gone, and if you're watching this, Grave Crow, I hope you come back. And I also wanted to mention that there was an exchange between Philip Rose, aka the True Puka, and Bewildered Ape. I think True Puka is right that, you know, we have to not engage in that kind of thing. But simultaneously, you know, we have to decide, if we're going to have leaders, we have to figure out who those leaders are. I think the True Puka presents himself as a leader. I think that's fine. If we had an election, I'd probably vote for him. But if we're going to rally around a cause, which I think we should, which is putting hate out the door on YouTube, and I think Zenestrad has done a video, which he's talking about the tone that we use. I know that King John has recently decided he's going to start banning people and reporting them. And I think we should be more militant about keeping the toxic level down, and we can control that, and I think we should.
That is a fantastic idea. Why don't you start with your own videos? Anyway, enough of that bullshit. It's time for me to get out of here, so until next time folks. Don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
extra hack here is just the men's rights movement. You bunch of betazoid nerds! You bunch of fedora-wearing neckbeards wouldn't know how to be a true alpha if you got a brain transplant from Samuel L. Jackson himself! And the reason why you cling on to your phony movement is because, unlike me, you don't have game. So keep reading your pickup artist blogs in your parents' basements. You will never be a true alpha like Dylan the Hacker. Now I want to address girl rights what? So you're the main player in this MRA garbage? Psh, pathetic! You start a movement for men's rights and your leader is a woman? That's why you will always be beta. And my second problem with girl rights what? Is that she's a hypocrite. If you're gonna fight for fake causes, at least fight for your own team. And the truth of the matter, feminism and MRA is for a bunch of socially awkward nerds who never learn how to interact with each other. Me and my supermodel girlfriend laugh at you. Look at the socially awkward nerds, look at them and laugh. They don't know how to deal with each other, so they create funny movements and cry on the internet. You bunch of 20-something introverted dorks. You bunch of us against them propagating morons. Do you have any idea how DNA works? You are genetically coded monkeys yelling at social issues, while geniuses like me are changing the world in real ways. I discovered the Higgs boson. Yeah, that's right. It was me. You are all a bunch of losers. You will never become true scientists. Dylan the Hacker is a real deal. Have a horrific day.